they had some big problems today with the platform, with the Zoom platform. Item 4 on our agenda is public comment. This is an opportunity for members of the public to give their input on items that are not on the agenda tonight. If you're on the Zoom platform, if you go to click the participants button and go to the bottom of the participants box, and you'll see a raise hand button if you'd like to speak. If you are on the phone, I don't know that I see anybody. Yeah, one phone in listener. You can also speak and raise your hand by dialing *9 to raise your hand, and then we'll unmute you by having *6. So are there any attendees tonight who would like to ask a question about an item not on tonight's agenda? I don't see any hands. So if there's no public comment tonight, then we'll move to our next agenda item. This is the consent calendar. These are routine matters on our agenda that can be voted on as a group, unless one of the counselors would like to take an item off of the consent calendar and discuss it further. So tonight on the consent calendar, we have the minutes from June 15th special meeting. We have minutes from June 22nd regular session, minutes from July 27th. That was a regular meeting. We also have on consent calendar recommendation from the tax assessor for abatement to the 2020 motor vehicle tax roll in the amount of $9,800, abatements to the 2020 real estate tax roll in the amount of approximately $1,200, abatements to the 2020 personal property tax roll in the amount of approximately $1,100, and recommendation from the tax assessor for addition to the 2020 personal property tax roll in the amount of $4,300 approximately. And the last item on the consent calendar is an application for a new Biddling license for Table Express Care at University Orthopaedics located at 1598 South County Trail. Would anyone like to remove an item from the consent calendar to discuss it further? Mr. Zarella?
If you're currently going to University Orthopaedics to that building, do I have to recuse myself or no?
As a patient?
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm a doctor. I switched over.
That wouldn't require recusal. It would fall under the class exception in the ethics code.
All right.
So if no items are to be removed, then I'll look for a motion to approve the entire consent calendar.
I'll make a motion to approve the entire consent calendar.
Motion by Mr. Zarella, seconded by Councilor Kornthal. We'll call the roll. Is there any further discussion? Call the roll. Councilor Kornthal.
Aye.
Councilor Engelhardt.
Aye.
Councilor Zarella.
Aye.
Councilor Donegan.
Aye.
Chair votes aye. The motion carries 5-0. This brings us to item 6, which is reports and presentations. I'd like to introduce our town manager, Mr. Andrew Nada, who will issue his report on a variety of subjects, initiatives, COVID-19 response, and public safety update. Mr. Nada.
Great. Good evening, everyone, members of the council. So I'm going to indulge your patience tonight. There's because we had taken a meeting off, there's a significant amount of information. I'm going to highlight just some key topics for this evening. But before I do that, I just wanted to preface my comments regarding our COVID response and some recent articles that we've been tracking, the financial status of cities and towns, as well as the school reopening and other related factors. Generally, when I've been making comments, I've been making them extraordinary, and I'm aware of this, extraordinarily cautious tone, because I really believe that we need to be extremely cautious. And I'm a little surprised on a statewide level that we have not had more of an open and robust conversation on potential impacts. And I had a nice meeting with the board of directors of the Chamber of Commerce this past week when they finally met again in person since back in February or March. And I found myself in communicating with these business owners from around town just really giving them probably the story they really didn't want to hear, and mixed in with what they already know, clearly is some hope that, things won't be as difficult, additional resources will be available, there'll be more consumer confidence, and a little bit of all the things we're seeing right now during our peak summer season, when we're able to utilize our outdoor spaces much more. So some businesses that are actually open, I think people forget the fact that we have a lot of businesses that are closed and have not opened because of the owner's choice. And, as we go forward, and now we're in August, we're starting to get to September, we can start to feel the window starting to close on us here in New England about all the extra steps that we've taken, not only locally, but on a statewide basis, to support our local restaurants and retailers to use outdoor spaces and get creative. So, but much more of what I had to say to the board was much more of a cautionary tone. So my goal in doing that is really an approach that I have to these types of matters where, although I fully understand that, part of leadership is to really not subject anyone to that additional anxiety or stress or frustration that may come along with a crisis like what we're in. But I think the truth and the obvious responses and reactions that we're going to have to make as a community and as a state are important to put out front, because there are a lot of smart people around the state and around the country working on these issues, and I just don't see the value today for us here in East Greenwich to kind of bury those topics and waiting for a sprinkling of hundreds of millions of dollars from our federal delegation that absolutely may or may not come. And I think it's important that we put our heads together and we get creative here at the local level, and we try to develop solutions today based on, a realistic perspective on what we know is going to happen this winter when businesses are forced back inside and COVID is still present, as it will be, and we're still seeing 50 to 150 positive cases a day, and we're still seeing other tragedy around the state. But we're, at the same token, we'll have schools most likely and hopefully back in session, and we'll start to still gain some confidence. So I say that out front, knowing, because as I communicate with people, I think everyone reacts in the public, reacts a little differently to the message. And I'm just trying to keep it out front so we know what our problems are, we recognize them, and we as a community, if others want to pass and they want to wait, that's fine for them. But I think if we can put it out in front of us and we can work on it collaboratively, I think we're going to be that much farther ahead. So I just wanted to preface my comments, because really kind of more of what you see in the report is there's some positive, and then there's some caution in this report as you cover the various topics. And the very first topic talks about maintenance of effort, talks about relief, and I understand there's some interest on the council regarding a resolution that was released by the town of North Smithfield, really talking about education relief from the maintenance of effort mandates that the state have. So, those are the types of things that really not a lot of people are talking about. I think they hold hope that we're all going to be made whole with our education and our municipal aid, as well as our library aid, right? Although it's a separate operation, the community supports it with the majority of its funding. So that aid of $100,000+ is really critical to our East Greenwich Library and how that functions. So I think there are requests going out for relief by communities like North Smithfield and many others, because they know that it's going to be difficult and there's going to have to be trade-offs made at a multitude of levels to be able to continue to offer services of some type. And the same goes for our education as well. So that's kind of the first topic. I'm not going to hit each of these as I go through, but there are a number that I run through. It's council resolutions, whether we would support it or not. The League of Cities and Towns continues to beat that drum and work very hard on behalf of all cities and towns, no matter how different we all are from each other and all the different priorities that we have. Regarding state aid support, they talked briefly about some additional information to come from Steve Coleman, the Chief of Division of Municipal Revenue, regarding quarterly payments on property taxes, as well as on today's statewide municipal call this afternoon, there were some brief comments. Really no changes regarding our pilot and our motor vehicle phase out payments that are expected to just come on a monthly basis, and they're gearing up to release their July 31st payment to the community, which is about approximately $105,000, hopefully in the next couple of weeks. And then we are going to remain confident that we're going to see that payment each month, which is really, as we know, in contrast to a full payment of about $845,000 that we would have customarily received July 31st. So again, I point these facts out just so we keep our eye on the ball and we know what's out there. And as we go forward, there are a lot of moving pieces, and we'll continue to stay on top of that and provide the council and the community with as much information as possible. There's one section on local media coverage on municipal finance. In addition to that, there's a section providing some information on the National League of Cities, which I think has really done a fantastic job in just giving me confidence that it's not just here in Rhode Island, but that cities and towns across the country are in the same exact situation, and that's not a good thing. But the National League of Cities has really put out some great information recently. One was their 35th annual city fiscal conditions report for 2020, which I think does a nice job of highlighting the economic impacts that differ among cities and towns around the country based on the construct of a local economy. And then the other article they put out recently was Cities Are Essential. It's a series of articles that the NLC is putting out on the fiscal impact of the pandemic, recession on cities and towns and villages. So this has become a reliable source of information for me to kind of cross-reference and provide some checks and balances with what we're doing, what the state of Rhode Island is doing, and what's happening elsewhere. And this is where a lot of the good information has come from regarding how others across the country have used CARES Act funding, and some analysis that both the League of Cities and Towns, the ICMA, as well as National League of Cities has done regarding the changes in the CARES Act regulatory requirements and where the funding can go based on decisions of state government. So that's those are important pieces. You know, something that I did want to note, and it is back in discussing with the Chamber of Commerce, some things that we've been working on kind of quietly behind the scenes. And we had already started to work on some possible initiatives for next summer. And at one point in the conversation, I talked to the group and I said, you know what, I'm not sure we can wait that long, really to next summer. We're still in August and we've still got a good part of our season to go. And I expressed my concern to a subgroup of the board regarding our ability to start to move forward now. So what that did is that spurred, it kind of accelerated a conversation that Steve Lombardi and I had regarding the potential creation of kind of an environment here on Main Street. And I'm specifically talking here regarding particular districts, areas that don't have significant availability of parking or private property to expand outside. So what that encompassed was an accelerated conversation on the ability to close down sections of Main Street on Sundays, probably midday through dusk, to start to create that draw in a safe way, of course, right? I mean, with all the appropriate protocols. In my office here in Town Hall, we're still vetting and approving various public and private events per pretty exhaustive template that the state of Rhode Island, Rhode Island Department of Health, DBR has put together regarding the types of things that you need to have in place with, you know, mask wearing, hand sanitizers, and the like. So what we're doing, we had started, the chamber was polling all our businesses on Main Street, and then all of a sudden the state launches its Take It Outside initiative. So we immediately initiated a call through John Snyder at Commerce RI, and we've had a good conversation. I've got a conference call with him and a team from Commerce RI tomorrow morning to talk about, as they've noted, resources and tools that they have to be able to support districts around the state in extending our outdoor season. So clearly that's something that we need, whether or not it's just here on Main Street or elsewhere in town. So we're going to be communicating with Commerce RI, and we hope to have significantly more information for the community on that in the coming couple of weeks as we gear up for a possible beginning on Sunday of Labor Day weekend or possibly the Sunday after. But we are trying to hit the ground running. We had pretty much full support of the businesses on Main Street, those within the district, those outside that are maybe concerned with parking and or through travel. We're working with them to work out some of the details. So we're excited about that initiative, and we hope that we're able to kind of create a little excitement about maybe just bundling up a little bit more, but doing it for the right reasons. The other thing that we're doing internally, and I've been working with Lee and Fred Gomes and other departments in town, is we're going to be adding some sandwich board signs along Main Street that are really encouraging mask wearing within that district, because really all the information that we have health related wise states that that's a significant has a significant impact whether or not we see full mask wearing or not within, not only from patrons of local business, but also from business owners and staff members, because that's probably the number one call that we receive is from local residents who are frequent in a local business. And for whatever reason, at a particular moment in time, they may have been uncomfortable with a member of the staff or management not wearing a mask. And so I think at one point, business felt that residents wanted to be like it was, right? Be more comfortable, have that friendly hello, talk and open. And actually, I think that works on some people, but I think at this particular point in time where we still are lacking consumer confidence to go out freely as they used to, that I think we need a stronger participation from our local businesses, and clearly we're working with the chamber to send out that message. So we're gonna have some different signs with some selective messaging, light-hearted messaging that'll be on these sandwich board signs down Main Street to just be able to encourage everyone that's here, residents and visitors alike, to really work with us, because I think it has significant meaning for many of our businesses as to whether or not they're going to be here come next spring. So that's another initiative. Noted a number of meetings that are happening on a statewide basis on a varying amount of topics, not all COVID related, that may be of importance to members in the community and the council. In addition to that, I had a fairly involved section I included, which I'm sure the council's aware of, the superintendent's East Greenwich Fall reopening plan. I think it was a nice document that covered really all of the various requirements that RIDE was placing on each of our districts. The superintendent has come out, and we speak on a weekly basis regarding not only the reopening, but more recently have ramped up our conversations, which I know Superintendent Meyer will be reporting out on tomorrow evening at the school committee meeting regarding school finances and the ability to reopen, and that fiscal piece, which does not get a lot of coverage on the statewide conference calls or press conferences that are held. I think everyone is focused on, rightfully so, on the importance of reopening and reopening safely for those that have confidence, those families that have confidence that their children can re-enter school in a safe way. But a major part of that is the mandates and requirements that the superintendent is using, and they come in a number of different guides, from reopening RI, back to school Rhode Island. We also have a reopening frequently asked questions that really cover a lot of the key issues that we're dealing with. I think we all watch the news and read the paper, and we know that there are significant facility issues, transportation issues, potentially staffing issues based on support staff and teachers' willingness to return to the workplace in person versus remotely. So all of those moving pieces are really can at one particular point create an overwhelming conversation to be balancing all of those unique aspects. So on top of that, something that's really not discussed, which I've taken on separately with the governor's office and her staff and the League of Cities and Towns, is that in a recent communication with the governor's office, I made it clear after communicating with the superintendent that East Greenwich is prepared, and we're prepared to reopen under whatever plan the superintendent feels confident in doing that. But the sustainability of any plan for any district in the state of Rhode Island is really unsustainable unless there's some additional financial support to backfill equipment, supplies, and staffing and training requirements for any of our districts. So that's something that I continue to work on, not only for the municipal side, but the school side as well. to be able to continue to send that message. And we remain hopeful. Again, I think the governor is holding off based on being tied into the potential for stimulus and basically potential diversion of some of the CARES Act funding to be able to backfill. But when you watch a press conference or you're on a conference call, there is no joint discussion on requirements, opening, and funding. It doesn't exist. So that's a concern and really something we need to be cognizant of. And we're communicating with the superintendent. And I highlighted kind of just to ground us in the same place when, as a community, when we talk about where we are today, and that'll change in the next couple of weeks. And I highlight in bullet form really where the entire community is, municipal and school, and that talks about the fact is no commitment on additional forced stimulus from Congress yet. There's no state budget today. So really the only thing we can rely on financially is the budget that was approved minus our state aid. Run through and just provide a number of other key elements that I think are important to the conversation, such that we have no commitment from any agency regarding eligibility for COVID-related expenses on reimbursement. We still don't have a full picture regarding reimbursement, our 75% reimbursement from Fema, and if and when that will happen. Talk about two of the other major pieces that we covered during our budget development, and that was also capital funding and how we, on the municipal side, have really not spent any capital funding other than absolute emergency acquisitions at this particular stage, as we just remain very uncomfortable as we try to protect down the road all of our critical services, and we may have to forego some of those capital investments in terms of protecting the integrity of our organization, staffing levels, and services to the community. So the same goes for the school department. We've mentioned that to the superintendent, that they need to be fairly diligent regarding their use of capital funding that they may or may not prioritize as a critical expense at this particular stage, knowing what may happen. Also, capital reserves, the capital reserves that the council authorized that we transition forward from operating to capital right in June at one of our council meetings, that those funds stay available at this time, and we will not expend any of them other than in an emergency situation. You know, in addition to that, it's unassigned fund balance, and the school and the town have limited unassigned funds that we would be able to in a one-time just commit to COVID-related expenses. So that's something that it's too premature to even really talk about, but I think in the coming weeks that time will come, or at the worst case in the coming months, once we get into the budget process, just to ensure that neither we or the school is running a deficit at year end. So, and run through just a number of other points. And again, it's just in an effort to kind of ground us at a particular place so we know what we have today, what's before us, and as we make critical decisions moving forward regarding staff hirings, refilling of positions, and other matters like that, that we're in a good place. So the other news the governor reported out on today was the creation of a municipal task force, which I think was very important. And I raised that point to the governor on a conference call several weeks ago. And I think it's an important first step. We have a long way to go, but it's a municipal resiliency task force, a small group of 8 people yet to be appointed to that committee that are going to meet on a weekly basis, probably, I believe, even a bi-weekly basis going forward, in an attempt to look at varying pressures and areas of need within all the communities around the state, and us, plus other areas where we can jointly work collaboratively to be able to save funds and share resources. That wraps up that section. The one other item that I wanted to really leave with the council this evening, actually there's 2, was Main Street. So many months ago, I raised to the council that I was going to be communicating with RIDOT, Department of Transportation, regarding where Main Street fell on their 10-year transportation improvement program. So finally had the chance to communicate with Director Alvidi's office. I've been pleased thus far with the response. So several years ago, communications, which I highlighted in 2 memorandums, that one from me to the director's office and one from Tom Queen and out of the Department of Planning on behalf of the director, responded. And Tom and I have had several phone calls since then. So we're working on a plan to be able to reintroduce this program. It really involves the full extent of Main Street from Division Street to First Street, and really focuses on a total reconstruction. We're talking a several $1 million project. So the communications that were very significant at one point when Tom Coyle was here as manager with Director Alvidi's office, was looking at a project of a much smaller scale. The town was going to have a much greater role, and I think at the time that was the case, to just try to get the project done and try to get the road repaved and sidewalks finished. So we are looking at right now probably a project worth several $1 million, and we'll be working on a partnership with RIDOT to be able to try to reintroduce that, where the town will take on some project management responsibilities and design responsibilities in a way that we can support an acceleration of it, because I think our businesses would agree that our ADA, a lack of ADA compliance on Main Street, as well as the deterioration of our road network, is critical at this point, as well as some of our drainage. So we're moving that forward really quickly, and as I have new information, we're going to need significant advocacy from not only the council and the community, but also our legislative delegation to be able to make sure that that project is prioritized. And that's going to be challenging at a time when revenues are falling off, which also fund the DOT 10-year program. And really the last item that I have tonight, Dr. Schwager, is to report out on is just two things. We're going to start highlighting staff changes. So I provided that in section F, and we talk about our new accountant position filled by Joanne Gershkoff in our finance department, the promotion of Officer John Allen to the sergeant position on third shift. Also several changes in our recreation department. Some of these are a bit dated over the past several months, include the promotion of Rachel Cloud to recreation manager from her former position of program coordinator, the hiring of Shayla Poria as our program coordinator, and then the recent hiring of Mark Pepparelli as our interim harbor master, as our official harbor master is on leave at this particular point in time due to personal reasons. We're going to try to carry that forward just to keep the information on some of our staff changes out front, so the community knows who's in these roles, and if they want any information specifically, they can follow up either with my office or with the individual department. And really the last was, as the interlocal trust becomes more of our daily function here in the town, now that we're back with the trust recently released a series of information regarding COVID-related responses and actions by communities. These are purely recommendations. Our staff is reviewing them right now, and we're looking at it, but there's some really good information there. There's some great visuals that both for municipal government and for reopening of schools that I've pushed out to our professional staff, and I think we'll see some good information like that coming from the trust on a number of levels and on a number of topics in the coming months ahead. So I know there's a lot more information there, but I think for the sake of kind of moving it along, I'll turn it back to you, Mark, and any questions that the council may have on any of these or other topics.
Thank you, Mr. Nada. There's a ton of information there. I see a question from Mr. Donegan, Councilor Donegan.
Andy, can we talk about the issue of whether or not sort of COVID supplemental funding to the schools is going to be viewed as maintenance of effort in the following year? I know that there's the resolution. What action do you want us to take, and anything else going forward that we can help move the needle on that at the General Assembly? Because it would have to be a relief at the General Assembly. Could you talk about that?
Yeah, so Mike, on issues like that, I think in communicating with my colleagues around the state, everyone has a different approach. I'll share with you my approach, and I was on a call late this afternoon, and I think a number of us were not necessarily in agreement as to how that should be approached. And so for me, it's very important at this particular time that if the council has a strong opinion on an issue, that we communicate that. And I would not feel uncomfortable in communicating it often and repeatedly. So I think it's very important, the points that you just made, Mike, in terms of bringing our delegation up to speed, knowing the potential implications. And I think everyone is holding off on a topic like this because they just don't know what the impact is yet, right? So we're going to know fairly soon I know that that makes me uncomfortable, is waiting until we know, which might be in a couple of weeks, it might be in a month. So to me, that makes complete sense, as well as a number of other areas that include mandates that we might want to target for potential relief going forward. So I support, I think the general resolution that was put together by the town of North Smithfield makes a lot of sense, and I think it could be expanded into a number of different areas going forward.
I would, and I guess this is the topic for another meeting, I guess, but I agree wholeheartedly. We don't want to get caught where the crisis happens. We get the answer from the General Assembly or, the federal government that no money's coming, only cuts.
Yes.
And now we're trying to respond, and we're going to give money to the schools. And yet we run the risk that in a very short number of months, when we do the budget, all of a sudden we can't even maintain the effort because the maximum tax rate wouldn't even support it, let alone that we don't want to do that. So I think we have to be proactive, and I would, I'd like to see if anybody else is interested in putting that on an agenda where maybe, Andy, you could put together some bullets for us to consider.
Sure.
I assume library funding is a thing. I assume that,
Yes. Yep.
right? I mean, there are
Yes.
a number of state mandates that we probably just want to know that we have some latitude during this crisis.
Yes. Yeah, there are, Mike. I'll be happy to put that list together for your consideration.
Is anyone else interested in having him do that?
Yeah, no, I think that's a great idea, actually. And I guess I would add my question in. I mean, do we have a running total of what the COVID costs are and approximately how much they are down in the school side?
Yeah, we don't, but I understand that the superintendent has been tasked with that on the education side, and I think she will be reporting out on that tomorrow evening. What we do have on our side is we have workbooks that we are providing to FEMA on all of our expenses. So I'm happy to we'll know tomorrow evening a more accurate number from the school side, and I'm happy to present that at the next council meeting regarding where we stand in terms of our requests to FEMA thus far on COVID-related municipal expenses.
Right, yeah. I just had one other to follow up sort of on where Mr. Donegan was going. I am very concerned about the school financing part of it and to making sure that we do everything in the proper way to make sure that we are eligible for all the financing that we get before any monies are expended on our behalf or by us or by the school committee, to make sure that all the proper procedures are followed so that we get those reimbursements. I don't want to miss out on any opportunity at this point. We cannot. I think it's imperative that we do everything properly.
Councilor Cornthal.
Yes, I agree both with Renu and Michael. I think answer, maybe you can answer this, Andy. When I listened to the school, when they were talking a little bit about the budget, they had commented that 75% of some of their costs would be covered.
Mm-hmm.
And what I'm hearing for you is that we're not positive of that.
Yeah, so they were specifically referring to FEMA reimbursements on
right.
Most of it is not on labor on the school side. Most of it's supplies. So I think that they have a very good chance of receiving the 75% reimbursement on the supply side. The problem for us is we have no idea when we're going to see that funding. It may show up in FY21, it may be FY22. As you know, there's such a crush right now for funding on a national level for any number of issues that are happening, not just COVID response, as we see wildfires, hurricanes, everything that's happening around the country. So I think it's going to take us some time. I feel good, and I know that our finance staff and our EMA personnel and Fred Gomes is working with the school staff right now to ensure that we're getting everything on paper and submitted that we can for both the municipal and the school side in that respect.
Right. I think it's important for the public to know that we don't know what our federal money is. We don't know what the state budget is. The town is sort of lacking direction. It's unclear what our expenses are going to be reimbursable. It's sort of unclear for the school. I mean, I hear the governor saying she wants to open, but my question is, with what money are you opening? And I think probably the scariest thing that I read from some of the information that you submitted to us, Sandy, was, and I'm going to read this quote. It's from the National League of Cities, where report that says the true depth of financial impact will only become more evident and more severe in the years to come as budgets absorb this economic hit.
Right.
I mean, you can go into that if you want to, but I mean, this is long-term hit that every municipality is going to take. And, we have to think of us, we have to think of our town too. On the other side, the Take It Outside program, I think that's great. And I appreciate, I've spoken to Steve Lombardi and you regarding complaints that I've received from people regarding compliance. And I know Steve has spoken to the responsible or irresponsible culprits as they are. And I hope that these people that are not in compliance will get on board, because we want to do things in a safe manner. And I think that the Take It Outside program is great, but people need to wear masks and be compliant.
Mark, one thing I didn't mention, and it's relevant to our conversation, is that our professional staff is trying to hedge right now. We're trying to better our position, I guess, versus an unknown action or inaction that's going to happen. And so one example that I want to give you, a success story, like I said, there's tough news and then there's good news, is the work of our fire chief, Bernie Patno, and the work that he's done in terms of the recent grants that we've secured. And they could not come at a more timely point for us, where our capital budget was reduced. There are some significant public safety equipment that we were going to have to purchase. It would have compounded the situation as our dollars and resources are more less available for investment. And the chief, as everyone read in recent news articles that were put out, secured 2 grants. One was an East Greenwich only, about $187,000 plus or minus, for the replenishment of 20-year-old air packs that are needed by our firefighters. We were going to be budgeting over the next 2 years in capital of almost $90,000 each year to be able to fund that acquisition. We have a 5% match on that, so less than $10,000 commitment on our end to support that. So that is a win-win for us at this particular point in time. And the second is a great collaboration with our neighbors in North Kingstown, and Chief Cattell and Chief Patno work collaboratively to secure a joint grant of $275,000 for each community, a series of emergency medical equipment to outfit our rescues, whether they're heart monitors, CPR machines, table power loading systems to be able, for stretchers, for fire trucks and things of that nature. So that's something that we're going to continue. And plus the chief has a number of other grants out, not only for the staffing to fill vacancies that we're working on, 2 of the vacancies in the fire department that we should know about soon, plus another pumper truck, another engine that we're looking at. And some of those are going to be tough to secure, but at least we're in the game. And I appreciate the work of our professional staff, because every so often the stars do align and you actually come out ahead on some of these federal grants, and really it comes at a great time for us. The only other piece, which I don't believe was commented on publicly, was through some work of our recycling locally through the Rhode Island Resource Recovery. We secured, there was a COVID-related rebate, as well as an additional rebate for the fact that the community exceeded 25% recycling. We're at about 27.16% in fiscal year FY20. So we're going to receive a rebate from, which I think we already have received it, of just under $6,800 from Rhode Island Resource Recovery. So every little bit helps. And so we appreciate the good work of our staff and the good work of the public in terms of recycling. It does pay off, not every year, but in the end, this all comes at a very good time for us.
Well, thank you, Andy. That's a lot of information there. And thank you for the comments from the council. I think there's a lot of interest and a lot of urgency in really staying up to date on financial issues. So I think, Andy, we may want to consider just having a standing agenda item for each council meeting, with an update on federal, state, municipal funding. Because it's with the schools starting, the state budget likely to be passed at some point, there'll be more and more information. So we'll keep it on our agenda for each meeting. We do have a quick question, Andy. Obviously, we don't know what's happening at the federal and the state level. I'll get you in a minute, Mike. As far as FEMA, do we have any update on FEMA action?
We don't. Yeah, no. So we continue to submit on a monthly basis, and we have no new information regarding if and when. The only activity that we've had has been a review of our submittals, and unfortunately, we've had several that are discounted and are now not going to be eligible. So I think when it comes to specific COVID-related equipment and supplies, those are being looked at much more favorable than personnel costs or even public safety costs. So I think that's one particular area, whether or not it makes it into a forced stimulus or not, that there have been times in the past, it will not be precedent setting, where there are additional modifications that are made. Some storms that I'm familiar with from many years ago did go from 75% reimbursement to 90% reimbursement. So there are a number of options I think our federal delegation has to redirect funding back to the local level. But unfortunately, I don't have any new news at this time on that front.
You also mentioned the municipal task force that the governor is the governor forming that? I want to know, is there a integration with the executive branch, the legislative branch, or is that just municipalities working together?
Yeah, so she noted it on today's conference. I didn't catch the whole soundbite, but it's several people from the budget office. It's 4 members from the League of Cities and Towns, one of those being the executive director, Brian Daniels, and then 3 other internal appointments. I've submitted significant interest on my behalf to sit on that committee, of course, to be part of that conversation. And then several other representatives that the governor would appoint. So it's only a total of 8. It's not a large committee, a little bit different for a task force, but really no representation outside of the governor's staff, and plus 1 or 2 other appointments that she has in the League of Cities and Towns.
Yeah, I also wanted to thank you again for your action with Department of Transportation as far as getting our Main Street back on the agenda at DOT. That's kind of bounced around over there since 2016. And I think you've got their attention. I know the director, Mr. Alvedi, did write a letter back to you, and there's ongoing discussion, so that's great news. Mr. Donegan, I think you had your hand up.
Thank you. So 2 things that I have a question about. One is, I guess one thing I have a question about. Andy, can we talk to our delegation about speaking to the governor to talk to Alvedi?
Yes. Yeah, by all means.
We can invite them to this, or you can, I'd like to, let you, I'm sure the council supports that effort. So if you could make those calls and let us know if we can be helpful in that regard. Those are kind of important. That's an important one for us. And secondly is, I just wanted to congratulate the chief and you working with him. I know that when we were rebuilding our government and we needed a town manager and we needed a fire chief, I know there was significant discussion with Chief Patino and you about grant writing and how that can really augment the finances for the departments in the town. And in this instance, you guys and the chief leading that have really delivered at a time when we couldn't, it couldn't be more critical. Those capital funds that we can now divert to operations in this crisis are really important to us. So thank the chief if he's listening, and thank you, Andy.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Nada. If there's no further comments, we're going to move to item 6B. This is an update from the town clerk and information technology director on implementation of e-licensing for alcoholic beverage licenses using OpenGov. And so I'll ask Mr. Nada to introduce his staff members and to make any comments he'd like to in introducing this item.
Yeah, sure. It seems like a light year ago that we actually had this conversation because so much has happened since then. But we, under the council's direction, have committed to move forward with an automated licensing system. And so in the spite of everything else going on in the world today, professional staff have continued to move forward with both Lee and Wendy Schmidl in terms on the technical side, implementing loading applications. And Lee's prepared tonight to give you an additional update as we unbelievably are getting closer to our next round of starting that over again. So we want to make it a much easier and more seamless process this year and not have a repeat of what you went through last year, and for businesses as well. And I think Lee's going to explain a little bit about kind of where we are today. Lee?
Sure, thanks. And hi, everybody. Just very briefly, yeah, the good news is that we are making progress in between cyber attacks and pandemics and whatever else comes our way, but we are resilient, and I am committed to getting this done with a lot of help. So Elaine Despia and I in my office have met with Wendy several times over the past couple of months. And what we've been working on is building the templates and the workflows that work behind the scenes for this program. We are still working out several kinks to be expected. What we've done now is we've started entering and creating records for each anticipated business that will be renewing in the fall. And basically we're taking their old file and uploading what was submitted last year to create an individual record for each licensee. So I think the next step is going to be to start to look at offering some training for maybe a handful of maybe some of the more complex licenses to see how that works, and whether that's in an in-house training or a virtual training program. We'll work that out with each individual licensee with Wendy. And so once we kind of get that buttoned down and we feel comfortable with rolling that out, the program is designed to actually roll out a virtual renewal campaign. And I think how that works is it triggers an email to the licensee that says, hey, it's time for you to renew your license. And what they will have to do is sign on to the online permitting portal and create an account. We will help them, of course. They will locate the record that we've already created for them, and they'll start to begin to update their license and all the information that goes with that for the next year. Once that's done and the packet is reviewed in my office and it's deemed complete, if you will, I'll hit a magic button in there. A workflow will begin, which will allow multiple departments to review the application simultaneously. So that will take some time as we work through that process. But basically, to wrap it up, my goals here are to get that renewal campaign out by the end of September, early October, keeping in mind that we are in the middle of 2 elections at this point in time. I don't think I have to remind anybody about that, but there's a lot going on. And then, ultimately is to have all of the applications completely vetted before they come in front of you for final approval in November. So there's no coming back and forth. I see you smiling, Mr. Dunnigan. 100% vetted. They don't go before you unless they are complete. Parking, zoning, seating, all of that good stuff that we love so much. So lot to do, lot to accomplish, but I really want to get it done. And I know Wendy's on the line. I don't know if there's anything else to add, but it's been interesting to see how it works and to build the system. So that's kind of where we are. Thanks.
Ms. Schmidl, do you have any comments?
No, I think Lee summarized exactly where we are and what the next steps are perfectly. Thank you, though.
Thank both of you for all your hard work. Any other questions from the council? So you're almost, Mr. Donegan?
No question, just a thank you I know last year was sort of the gathering year, right? We had to get a set point, and that took a lot of work from you guys. And thank you very much. And I'm looking forward to the easier rollout this year.
Yes, and I would be remiss if I didn't acknowledge Lisa Bourbonnais and her staff, who, as we all remember, worked an awful lot to get that information to the forefront so we could really get a grip on it. So I thank them very much.
Right.
Thank
I think they came in over the weekend and reviewed 80 files, right?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, that's great. You're about to achieve the holy grail of licensing. So just bring them in and vote them up or down. So thank you again for all your hard work. If there's no further comments related to e-licensing, we'll move on to item 7. This is a public hearing. This is item 7A, presentation of proposed sewer budget for fiscal year 2021 in the amount of $4,077,079 with a sewer rate of $12.92 per 100 cubic feet. This was continued from July 20. At that time, the council, the public hearing on the sewer budget for fiscal year 2021, we had the budget on the website, and that night, our Director of Public Works, Joe Duarte, presented the budget. There was discussion from the council. The floor was opened to the public, but the council elected to continue the public hearing until tonight, just to make sure that everyone had an opportunity to evaluate the proposal, review the proposal. And so before we move forward tonight to consider a motion to approve the budget, I'll ask any councilors or members of the public who have any questions or comments related to the budget to raise your hand at this time. So the hand raising on the Zoom platform, please click the button on the bottom of the attendees list. And if you're on the phone, *9 will raise your hand. So questions or comments, first we'll start with the council. Anyone from the council, questions or comments on the sewer budget? We have Mr. Duarte available if there are any questions. Seeing none from the council, we'll take a look at attendees. We have 10 attendees. And if any of you would like to have a question or comment on the sewer budget, please raise your hand at this time. Welcome, Mr. Duarte. Good evening. I see no questions related to the sewer budget. We did have a comprehensive review at the last council meeting. And so, Mr. Zarella, I see your hand came up.
Yeah, I was actually going to make a motion to pass the budget.
Okay, we have a motion to adopt
I'll
the sewer budget for fiscal year 2021. We have a second from Councilor Engel.
Wait.
Ms. Carney.
Sorry for the interruption. I think at this point, and Andy, I don't know if I'm correct, we need to just have a motion to perhaps close the public hearing and then schedule it for final adoption on September 14th.
That's right.
Per the code.
Actually, so we have to have, is there a third reading that's required?
It's not really a third reading, but yes, per the code, it's a public hearing followed by final adoption at a subsequent meeting.
So we close the public hearing and it's a final adoption. There's no additional public comment at that
So
time.
I'll withdraw my motion.
But I know what you meant, Mr. Zarella.
I'll make a new motion to close the public hearing and to put this down for September 3rd,
September 14th.
September 14th.
14th.
Yes.
Now,
Second.
we have a new motion from Mr. Zarella, seconded by Councilor Engelhardt. So, Peter Squares, this does not require a stenographer. This is a public hearing.
If the public hearing is closed, it doesn't require a stenographer.
Well, it's open as of now.
Was there a motion to close the public hearing? There should be
Yeah.
a motion to close
Yes.
the public hearing and then put it down for a new date.
Okay.
At that date, it won't require the stenographer.
We did not require one today.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, it wouldn't require one at the next meeting either then.
Okay.
Yes.
So we have a motion and a second. Councilor Donegan?
Aye.
Councilor Zarella?
Aye.
Councilor Engelhardt?
Aye.
Councilor Cornthal?
Aye.
Chair votes aye. Motion carries 5-0. Mr. Duarte, you're all set for another year.
Thank you.
Spend it wisely.
To item 8, which is new business. We have 2 ordinances to consider tonight. The first is Ordinance 8A, an ordinance to amend the Code of the Town of East Greenwich, Chapter 134, entitled Industrial Wastewater Discharge, Article 1, General Provisions. This is the first reading of the ordinance, so generally we will just read it into the record, and then we will set the date for the public hearing, in which case the public and the council can really dive into this. Essentially, this chapter of our town's ordinance sets forth the requirements for industrial wastewater discharges in the town and enables the town to comply with state and federal laws required by the Clean Water Act and the general pretreatment regulations. This chapter also allows the town to regulate the effluent into the municipal wastewaters from local businesses and industries, and it also gives us certain powers of enforcement over businesses and industries in the town. Our ordinances also need to keep up to date with changes in state and federal regulations, and also changes in the type of wastewater discharge produced by businesses and industries in our town. So I'll ask our manager to introduce his staff member and Mr. Duarte, and to offer any context that he'd like to add to why we're considering this ordinance tonight. Mr. Nada, you're muted right now.
You are correct. It's funny how we do that. Yeah, thank you. No, I think in your initial introduction, I think you really covered a fantastic summary of what the recommended changes are to Chapter 134 on industrial wastewater charges. Joe can run through, in summary, a lot of the general provisions, which are, a lot of them are definition and just a modernization of the language in the existing ordinance. You know, there are some changes regarding prohibitions on discharges, number of the things that you've really mentioned, specific elimination of itemized lists of prohibited compounds, the more broad language that were introduced in terms of an ease of enforcement and application of the existing ordinance. So I'd like to really applaud Joe's work on this. I think he spent a tremendous amount of time. I think this has been one of those items on the list that has needed to be updated for quite some time. And I think with some of the pressure that we're under with the activity in town, some projects of a significant size, the diversity and the types of commercial uses that we're seeing, Joe is really spending a significant amount of time in terms of balancing our capacity and how we're viewed by the various enforcement agencies and governing agencies in terms of how we operate our wastewater plant. So I'll leave it in Joe's hands to be able to highlight anything that we need to, and clearly at the next meeting we can dive into this in much more detail. But regarding Chapter 134, Joe, anything that you'd like to add?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. So I think both you and Dr. Schrager both highlighted perfectly what this chapter is about. Why now? It's been, you know, a project in over the years, items that we needed to change. But recently we had a visit from Rhode Island DEM that looked at our pretreatment program, our local limits that we impose upon industry, and felt that we needed to make some changes, especially with the popularity now that we have with breweries and distilleries coming across the state. They're really posing an issue for our wastewater facilities. Others more so than some more so than others, I should say. And we are one of the facilities that are directly impacted a little bit more than other types of treatment facilities. So as Andy had noted, we made some changes. I've been working with a consultant that we have hired to draft our new local limits report. And the reason I'm saying this is because there will be financial implications, at least by next year, as a result of this program. And one of the first things we have to do is modify our ordinances In particular, page 22, which is section 13, 134-13. That's basically a thrust of the changes that we need to do, though. They're interim changes to a couple of the chemical parameters, BOD and TSS, biological oxygen demand, and total suspended solids. These are things that the DM imposed upon us right now, so we have an interim ordinance that we can use until we can do a better local limits report. Unfortunately, the local limits report isn't going to be able to be completed until we do an upgrade of our facilities plan. The facilities plan, I'd like to compare it to like a top plan for the community as far as, how the community is going to develop its lands and so forth. The facilities plan is everything to do with sanitary sewers in this town, from collection to treatment of the water. So that has to be upgraded next year. I mention that because it will be costly. It's about a $200,000 report. And at the conclusion of that report and presentation to DM is when they will bless us with the new local limits report that we will have and carry that on for at least 5 years. But in the interim, they acknowledge that there's an issue with breweries, and therefore we need to make some changes now. And we wanted to add these changes, like I mentioned, on section 134.13. We've made some changes on the parameters as it relates to breweries and distilleries and so forth. So that was the largest component of these changes. The rest is just, as I had mentioned before, on the sewer budget as well. We going to have to do a little better in our pre-treatment program. So we're going to be working with a consultant to help us to that end. Especially with the items of BOD, as I had mentioned. It's critical that we understand where we are, because hydraulically we have a capacity of the facility. But if we don't watch this component, that capacity could be reduced because it's to the level of what we can treat wastewater. So there is some implications that we need to handle now. And we need to start looking at that to make sure that we can allow our businesses to thrive, bring new business into town, and yet have the capacity to handle all the wastewater treatment, as well as any residents that still need to connect to our system. There's still probably a few hundred households that are yet to connect as a result of our sewer expansion program. And so we want to make sure that we don't have any issues with them connecting, as well as any industry or businesses that want to come into our town. We want to welcome them, and we just want to make sure we have the capacity to handle these industries. So this chapter, this ordinance, it was a lot of cleanup work that we had to do anyway, and added a few things. I'm sure there'll be changes after the local limits report approved next year, but it just cleans up the report and adds the pretreatment section a little bit more wordy, a little bit more sections to support our pretreatment program. That's pretty much it in a nutshell. So I don't know if you had any questions or you want to go over anything in detail.
Questions for Mr. Duarte? Well, Joe, thanks for all your work. This is a 42-page revision of the chapter 134. So you can see you put a lot of time and effort and energy, and thank you to our solicitor and manager as well. If there's no other questions from the council, anybody else on the way in, I'd ask that we accept this ordinance at first reading and move it on to a public hearing and adopt a date for a public hearing for second reading. Yes, Lee Carney.
President Schrager, I would suggest public hearing on September 28th so that we're in compliance with the advertising requirements.
Thank you for that update. Can I have a motion to move this to second reading at public hearing on September 28th?
So moved.
Mr. Donegan, seconded by Councilor Cornthal. We'll take the roll. Councilor Donegan. Councilor Cornthal.
Aye.
Councilor Zarella. I'm sorry, Ms. Carney?
I apologize. I think I've made an error. Is September 28th a Jewish holiday? Because I have it on the 29th, which is a Tuesday. I think that's one of the meetings that we may have bumped.
I see. I don't have
Hold
the
on.
holiday.
September 28th is Yom Kippur.
Yom Kippur.
Yeah, that's.
So we'll be meeting on the next day on Tuesday?
Yes, yes, sir. Yep.
So Mr. Donegan's motion needs
I'll
to be
modify
amended.
the motion. I'll modify it. That's
Okay.
fine.
So we had Mr. Donegan voted affirmatively, Councilor Corenthal,
Yes. Aye.
Councilor Engelhardt,
Aye.
Councilor Zarella,
Aye.
Chair votes aye. Thank you, Lee, for recognizing all holidays to keep us on track there. That closes item 8A. We'll move on to item 8B. This is a companion ordinance also related to sewers. This relates to Chapter 197 entitled Sewers, and this is basically all things related to sewers, including sewer use classifications, connections, sewer assessments, user fees, 23 pages of ordinance. So we'll turn this back over to Mr. Duarte, and you can give us a few words on this ordinance as well, Mr. Duarte.
Very good. Thanks again, Dr. Schwager. And I know how unexciting sanitary sewers can be, so I'll try to go quickly. And that's why I crammed it all in one meeting, so I wouldn't have to keep coming back to the subject matter. However, again, it's items that I've been trying to change for several years, and I think this is, get it all over with in one shot. We do have, I won't go very much into detail, but some of the things some of the highlights I want to bring to your attention is, there will be other documents that I'm going to bring to the town council, such as a standard on our design components of the sewers. Occasionally, we'll have engineers that are going to design sewer systems, and they want to make sure that they design according to our standards. And we have certain standards. We're just cleaning it up, and I will have a manual, an actual manual of sewer standards that I would like the council to approve, hopefully by the next town council meeting. It is referenced in the ordinance, so I want to have it in place so that we can just hand this out to anybody that comes to our town and not work with them on a case-by-case basis. We'll have one uniform stamp. So that's one of the components in here. Again, there was a lot of cleanup work in this report. One section in particular that I thought it was important that we touch upon was section 197.31, which deals with rates and charges. So when we send our sewer use billing every year, we have classifications for the different types of users: residential, governmental, industrial, commercial, and subsections of those classifications. So I did a little bit of cleanup language in there, especially on the residential. We feel that, there's, been a double benefit to some of the residential accounts that had, we give a reduction in their usage of 15% for any household, and we consider that's going towards irrigation, other than down the sewer pipes, and so we always give them a credit. However, many of the residents have also been getting meters that separate the irrigation system, so we discount that amount, and yet they were still getting a 15% reduction. So we're going to clean that up. Anybody who gets a deduct meter will pay 100% of the flow, because it would be the net amount after the deduct meter. Those that don't have these meters will be 85%. Another item that I added was when with the tax assessor, they basically consider any residential use of over 5 units to be a commercial use. So again, in this particular ordinance, we've also made some changes whereby the multifamily apartments of 5 and above they're being basically used as commercial. And so we're going to be charging 100% of the usage there. So it was a minor change there. And then we also, on the commercial end, we really didn't have a good, we've been challenged a few times over the years with some of the business, especially on Main Street, that have mixed use. So there's residents above, there's commercial underneath, especially the restaurants. What do we do in those particular cases? And some of them wanted to have separate meters for the individual uses, and it just becomes way way difficult for administratively to keep up with that. So we're going to consider all those mixed uses as commercial, as does the assessor and other areas in other departments and so forth. So that was a little change we had to do there. One of the significant changes. One other item, which there'll be another chapter that I will bring to the council. Between these two chapters, there are fees that they talk about. And I'm going to have to devise those fees, and I'll present those at the next council meeting. And so to arrive at equitable fees for the different uses and so forth, we are now going to be going to a system of what we call EDUs, or equivalent dwelling units. It's a popular terminology, popular use that you see in the water industry and wastewater industry for billing purposes. And what we will do originally, when somebody comes to town and they want to connect to the sewer system, we'll make them get a wastewater discharge permit, which we will classify the business and determine the number of EDUs. Meaning, 5 units, 10 units, apartment will be 10 EDUs. And that has implications. We will charge by the EDU for the different developments that we have. By and large, there won't be huge changes from where we are now, so that the bulk of our single family, dual family homes that make up the bulk of our permits nowadays, there won't be a huge change to that. What we're targeting is basically these comprehensive plans that are coming through town, where they will come in with 93 units, they will come in with 30 units, and the fees are almost the same thing as for a single family home. We don't have a good fee structure to hit these multifamily comp plans that are coming through. So this concept of the EDUs will aid us in devising a more structured fee for these comprehensive developments that come through town. So we'll have that benefit. Another big section in this ordinance that was changed is the method of assessments, so that when we provide a sewer expansion to an area of town, we had an old methodology. It's still very much used throughout the country, in whereby you assess people based on the frontage of their property. So the more frontage they have, in theory, the more piping that needs to be put in, therefore they pay a little bit more. To be a little bit more equitable, because you could have one household on one side have 200 feet of frontage, where across the street it's 5 feet of frontage. Single family home, same amount of usage, and yet they would have to pay more because of that, and that became contentious method. It's falling out of favor with a lot of communities. So one of the areas we're going to go is to switch to EDUs, the concept of EDUs, and we define what that is. May it be a restaurant, commercial, single family, multifamily. We'll just spread the cost of that project upon that. So that's what the latter part of the ordinance covers, how we're going to be assessing from now on if we expand our sewer system. So we will have a new defined method, which I think will be a lot more equitable for mixed use, commercial, and single family. I think this would be a better approach. And that pretty much makes up, it's the makeup of this ordinance. So I'll leave it at the council if you have any questions.
Questions for Mr. Duarte? Thank you, Joe. So if there are no further questions, I'd like to ask for a motion to read the ordinance amendment into the town record, close first reading, and move this on to second reading for a public hearing on September, I'm sorry, was it the 25th? September 25th?
29th, Dr. Schrager.
29th.
29th.
Thank you.
So moved.
Motion made by Mr. Donegan, second by Councilor Cornthal. So we'll take the roll call. Mr. Donegan?
Aye.
Councilor Cornthal?
Aye.
Councilor Zarella? Councilor Engelhardt?
Aye.
Chair votes aye. Motion carries 5-0. Joe, thank you very much. In the last year, Joe, you've really accomplished some very substantive and substantial accomplishments with the wastewater treatment plant, getting the bond issue passed, and now with these very important ordinance upgrades. So thank you for really keeping East Greenwich at the forefront of of effective government in providing this service for our community. Okay, so we will move on to item 8C. This is the reappointment of Susan Aitchison to the Affordable Housing Commission for a 3-year term to expire July 1st, 2023. I think Susan is currently acting as the chair of that committee and has been very active and involved. She was previously on the Historic District Commission, so has really done a lot of public service for our town. Wanted to thank her for that and look for a motion to reappoint her to the Affordable Housing Commission. Mr. Donegan makes the motion, seconded by Councilor Corenthal. We'll take the roll. Mr. Donegan?
Aye.
Councilor Corenthal?
Aye.
Councilor Zarella? Aye. Councilor Engelhardt?
Aye.
Chair votes aye. Motion carries 5-0. Susan Aitchison is reappointed. This brings us to item 8D. This is the appointment to fill a planning board seat. We interviewed on July 13th Mark Gertzikoff, who expressed an interest in this position. So I'd like to see if there is a motion from the council to consider Mr. Gertzikoff for this position on the planning board.
So moved.
Mr. Donegan makes the motion for appointment, seconded by Councilor Corenthal. I think Mr. Gertzikoff has been on the Board of Assessment Review and has been involved in his community and is ready to step up to a position on the planning board. So I'll call the roll. Mr. Donegan?
Aye.
Councilor Corenthal?
Aye.
Councilor Zarella?
Aye.
Councilor Engelhardt?
Aye.
Chair votes aye. We now have a new member of the planning board. The appointment passes 5-0. This brings us to item 8E, report from IT Director regarding council meeting opportunities as a hybrid platform. I know that the manager and Director of Information Technology have been in discussions. So I'll turn this back to Mr. Nada to introduce the issue and introduce the Director of Information Technology, Wendy Schmidt.
Great, thanks, Dr. Swager. And so, as the council may recall, we were dispatched at the last meeting to investigate some options that we might have for reestablishing in-person meetings for the council. And so the IT department, under Wendy's direction, has been looking at various options. And coincidentally, in the midst of a crisis today, when nationally the Zoom platform went down, we were again troubleshooting some other options that we might be able to implement on the fly. Although I don't think any of them would have been successful based on the posting requirements of actually changing the type of meeting that we were holding. So. What the IT department has done, I'm going to give you a basic summary and I'm going to let Wendy jump into some of the technical issues, is that originally when we started the conversation, we were focused on a couple of things. And at the time, the governor's declaration on emergency order allowed for gatherings up to 25. So it was really putting us in a good position where we generally have 10 to 15 people already at a meeting, individuals at a meeting with the council, solicitor, myself, town clerk, other department heads, and support staff. And so there was a little bit of a window for our customary meetings where we probably have less than 10 people, that we probably could have made that happen for those in town who'd like to actually attend, physically be in person. So we really focused on Swift Gymnasium, which has a much more modern and robust system than what we have here at Town Hall. And so originally we thought a hybrid approach might work in terms of live streaming, because we still have that available. So initially we kind of were all in terms of making it happen quickly, using the live streaming mechanism along with the Zoom audio to be able to try to sync those together so that those members in the community who were at home, who didn't want to attend, could still participate. They could still follow it. They could still raise their hand. They could still be heard on an item. Now, what Wendy and her staff, and again, Wendy can go into more detail on this, we found some positives and negatives. Positives were that we could actually make that happen. The one negative that would make it a bit awkward was the fact that there's a time lag between the video of live streaming and Zoom audio, about 30 to 45 seconds, where the video, Zoom was a little faster than the video on live streaming. So it would make it a little bit awkward. So in looking at that as one option, we kind of put that aside, and Wendy and her staff went on to evaluate what we could do in terms of running a different type of Zoom meeting publicly. So we could have people in the audience, they could participate normally, establish one camera. So we would all be in the same room together. So clearly we couldn't have all our devices that would be competing with each other with interference. We would set those up. We'd have one camera that would pick us all up at once. And the audio element to it would also be picked up, thus allowing those residents that were at home to also, again, join the meeting with audio and video, join the full group at once, so it wouldn't be a webinar like it's here right now that we're working on this evening. So, Wendy kind of went through a process, and we feel very comfortable, and I believe of last notice that they have all the equipment that they need to move forward. The one caveat is that since that time that we originally discussed it, the governor has reduced that gathering size to 15. So at the end of the day, you would really have no ability. We could be in person, everybody on this call, as well as some of the professional staff, but really you wouldn't have enough capacity left based on the existing executive order to add members of the public in person. So that's something that the council is going to need to contemplate going forward until that number jumps again from 15 to 25 or 25 to 50 to get us up to a number where we could handle a good in-person crowd. The difference is that they can still participate, but it would be a remote participation, audio only from home. So let me turn that over. So we're ready to move forward based on the council's directive with those caveats. And I want to let Wendy articulate a little more succinctly than I just did regarding some of the hurdles, what we have in place, and any of her expertise in terms of managing the system at Swift versus here at Town Hall, and some of the other positives and negatives of moving forward. So I'll turn it over to Wendy.
Thanks, Andy. Actually, you did a great job. I'm not going to get too technical. I think the key thing is that because of the size of the gymnasium, it does give us the ability to social distance not only the town council, but also any participants. If we did have the proper authority to have 25 or more people in the room. And the other, excuse me, the other big driving factor was the audio system. The audio system at Swift can accommodate the microphones that you're used to using, and also audio coming from outside of the building. So those were the two big drivers to push us to Swift. And certainly we tested it out on Friday. We held a little Zoom meeting with the three of us conducting, and we played around. One of us walked outside and dialed into the meeting, and we were, there was no feedback. I mean, as you know, occasionally in the council chambers, just with the live streaming, we had feedback issues, and that was one of our one of the items we wanted to avoid. So we are ready to go. We feel confident that we can conduct a Zoom meeting from Swift Gym with the council as a panel. If we have people in the room, they would be able to be heard, and they would be broadcast. And if we had individuals who were at home, they would be able to dial in via audio like we're doing tonight. So it is now, it's up to you at this point.
Comments from the council?
I would be in favor of meeting in person at Swift. I just have a really hard time on Zoom, I have to admit. And also I think it would be more helpful for us as far as discussion purposes go. But that's what I think.
Councilor Donegan. Michael, you have to unmute.
I'm in favor of meeting in person, provided that we do some dry runs and see how that all works. Because I don't want to end up in a circumstance where we're actually running through a meeting and the technology that, maybe when you can control the local stuff, but maybe some platform issues happen. I just don't know. So I think I'd like to see, I wonder if we could have that run a couple of different times and see how it works before we make that move, is my thinking.
Absolutely, at your convenience.
Okay.
So Wendy, the scenario you propose at Swift Gym, have you looked at how the seating layout would look? What would the council, how would they be positioned? And how about the staff? Would they be off to the side? And can you get them all in one shot from the camera?
So we would have to we'd have to look at how you wanted to conduct this. So the way we tested it out on Friday was with a camera. So if you will, when we're in Swift, you usually sit at the dais at the top of the room, if you will. And the camera would be right in front of you and it would broadcast those individuals. We could have set up chairs to the left or right with tables for staff who would be caught in that actual video feed. And then the microphones and any dial-in conversation happens through the speakers. So it's as if people are in the room. And then we would have also available to us the podium and the portable microphone to allow for, so for example, if I'm speaking, I could step up to the mic, the podium, use the portable mic, make my comments, and everyone who would be participating in the meeting would see that I was speaking. It may be difficult to visualize. We can very easily coordinate with, Charlotte over at Swift, find a time that's convenient. We can all kind of visit Swift, stay socially distanced, and we can do a test.
Yeah, I think there's some interest from council members. I think meeting in person had some advantages. The one issue that I'd like to get some further input in is the use of public health measures in the setting of a pandemic. The social distancing is important. The use of masks is something I'm not clear on what would be the recommendation. Whether, although we could distance from 6 feet apart, we still are sitting in an enclosed building for anywhere from 1.5 to 3 hours, and there may be an executive session as well, and whether we would need to wear masks during that time. So that's something I think we would, I'd like to solicit some input from Department of Health or other advisory bodies. I have my own information that I use as a physician, but I'm not the physician for the town council. So I would like to see if we can get input so that we are comfortable that we are adopting all of the most suitable public health measures to keep everyone safe.
Mark, are you suggesting that we could take an action to appoint you as the physician for the town council?
No, I'll keep my day job.
We'll be the first council to have one of those in a COVID crisis.
Well, we do have a designated town physician.
Mark Fauci.
So Andy, what resources do we have available to help us answer those questions?
Yeah, so I think it would be wise if I take the opportunity to make those calls to the various state agencies that are involved to get a clarification from them on the 15-person gathering size for that type of meeting. I think clearly we all know examples of gathering sizes that exceed 15 in particular buildings for various functions for longer than that. So let me communicate with that office and kind of sense from them what some of the protocols that they would recommend that we have in place. I guess the bigger question is, if those come back positive and there are ways that we can take appropriate safety and protective measures to protect everyone that's in the room, and in the interim, in the next week or so, we have a dry run through of that and everyone's comfortable, are you looking for the first meeting in September, or are you comfortable holding off on any potential movement until at least that second meeting and or October, giving us the month of September to work through some of these details? Or do you want to move forward, right, to try to make this happen for the next meeting?
I'm comfortable if you need extra time to work out the details on this, or make sure it works properly.
Why don't we get the information from the health department, and then we can also set up a trial meeting.
Yes.
Maybe send out a scheduling. The next meeting is the 14th.
Yes. Yep.
So we have to see if we could set up a. So if we wanted to set up a trial, would we just hold a special meeting of the council just to convene to try out the system and then adjourn?
Yeah, to be safe, I would do that. Yeah.
Okay. So perhaps we can get it together by the 14th. If not, we'll shoot for the 29th.
Okay.
Does it mean I have to wear a tie again?
In the interim, if there are any other specific questions that members of the council have that you'd like me to present to DOH or other state officials in terms of how this should be set up, just let me know offline. I'll be happy to do that and have that information available for everybody.
Andy, perhaps in your travels on the different organizations you serve on, you can see what some of your colleagues are doing. I know in North Kingstown, they have had like one member of the council, I think the council president was there with the manager at Command Central, and the rest of the people were coming in from home. So I know there's a variety of ways this is being done around the state. Be interested to see if we can learn anything from some other people's experiences.
Yeah, I'd be happy to look into that, Doctor. On some of the other areas in municipal services, we're kind of out ahead. I think there's much more caution and a slower progression elsewhere, but I'll be happy. I've got a meeting coming up on this next week with a number of officials, so I'll check in with them and get back to the council on that.
Great. And thank you, Wendy and Don, for working on this for us. So this takes us to item 9. This is public comment for any of our attendees. If you have any comments to make on items that were not on tonight's agenda, please raise your hand using the raise hand button on the Zoom platform, or *9 if you're calling in by phone. So, Mr. Donegan, are you raising?
I am. I was raising my hand.
Yes.
So I'd like to make a motion to amend the agenda for discussion purposes. We haven't really brought this up, and I just wanted to float the idea for discussion on the town's ability and interest in looking into a potential moratorium of some sort on building permits. So I'd like to move to amend the agenda to put that on for discussion purposes now.
Okay, let me just close out public comment, and then we can put that on. I don't think I see any public comment, any hands raised, so we'll close item 9. So we have a motion from Councilor Donegan to amend the agenda to add for discussion purposes only an agenda item related to building permits and regulation of building permits. Mr. Donegan has made the motion. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Councilor Cornthal and Engelhardt both simultaneously seconded. So we'll take a roll call. Mr. Donegan?
Aye.
Councilor Cornthal? Councilor Zarella? Councilor Engelhardt?
Aye.
The chair votes aye. Motion carries 5-0. So Michael, why don't you sketch out a little bit about your concerns, and we'll open it for discussion.
Sure. So, as we all know, every time somebody volunteers to be in the planning board or the zoning board, we give them a sobering look and talk about the enormous time commitment that's going to be and how loaded the dockets are. And I remember my first years on the planning board, we didn't have a lot of activity, and then all of a sudden we couldn't meet more frequently enough to even just keep up with the statutory requirements regarding hearing the comp permits. And so as we go into this economic crisis, we all know our school populations are dramatically increasing. We know that we're one of the few municipalities that's growing and having that kind of pressure on our schools. As schools approach 70% of our budget, and we are enjoying a community where people really want to move. They want to move into it, and they want to participate, and they want to educate their children here. We end up in a circumstance where the planning board has no ability to regulate any of that activity based upon those fiscal concerns for comp permits. And we have other unrelated, development that's residential. It's not related to comp permits. So Duart had testified about 2 years ago when we had a request for 25,000 gallons of sewage a day for the Mahalides project off of Frenchtown, that there was approximately 112,000 gallons a day available at that time. New England Tech is looking at another dorm in the near future, especially as they have to cast a broader net for students, given that there's now free education at CCRI available. They've lost a lot of local people to CCRI, so they're casting a broader net, which means they'll be looking at residential facilities, which would require a significant sewer allocation should we decide to provide that. At this point, given the limited sewer capacity and the dramatic financial impacts to adding more students in our already overburdened schools, we don't, unless we take an action to limit building permits, we really have no way to manage this fiscal crunch resulting from this kind of development. So I was hoping just to put it on an agenda, maybe have our solicitor comment on, tell us what our rights are, and we can talk about policy and whether that makes sense, and just kind of explore it.
Mr. Squares, I'm sorry, Karen, why don't you weigh in here?
Yeah, I of course agree with Michael, but it came out at the last planning board meeting last Wednesday, and I think Lisa mentioned it, that there is an ordinance in town about I think the town council about 50 building permits a year, and she had talked a little bit about that maybe the town council has some discretion regarding that, how we issue those, as far as it's single family or et cetera. Probably maybe Peter knows more about that. I thought that did come out at the meeting last Wednesday.
She did mention that that the town, there is an ordinance, and Peter, maybe you can bring us up to date, that you could limit the building permits to 1% of the total units in the town, approximately 5,300, so that would be about 53 units. How you define a unit was a little bit unclear, but Lisa was going to go and check into that. Peter, what's your thoughts on this?
Well, there are really three areas of the general laws to look at. In my mind, if you wanted to implement a moratorium or some type of limitation on building permits, the first is within the Comprehensive Permit Act itself, which is Title 4553, and that allows for an ordinance that limits the rate of the issuance of building permits. So that's not a flat out moratorium. It just kind of sets a controlled schedule for the time that the building permits will be issued. So the town already has an ordinance on the books for that. The other area that would allow for moratoria is it's in the Comprehensive Planning Act, which is Title 22.2, Chapter 22.2 of Title 45, and specifically in Section 13 of that act. And that's the act that requires the town to have a comprehensive plan and occasionally update the comprehensive plan. I know the planning board, Mr. Donegan, you were probably deeply involved with that when you were on the planning board.
Mhm.
But that section allows a moratorium on building permits in two circumstances. The first is if you have a new comp plan amendment and you've called out a specific area in town that you're targeting for a land use change, it allows you to have a one-time moratoria for up to 1 year after you enact the comp plan amendment. But there's kind of onerous notice procedures to follow for that. And then the only other provision is in the event of the way they phrase it in the statute is a dire emergency that's not reasonably foreseeable as part of the comp planning process, that the town can impose a limitation on the number of building permits or other land use approvals to be issued. Obviously, the limiting language in that section is that it has to be a dire emergency. It doesn't give any guidance on what constitutes a dire emergency, but that's the type of, that's something that what the council should keep in mind about whether that can be successfully invoked, whether or not it amounts to a dire emergency or not. So on one hand, there's the moratorium that allows you to implement a land use change that's been identified in your comp plan and has been called out in the comp plan, and it has a notice procedure. And then the other moratorium is in response to a dire emergency. It doesn't really have the details of when you can invoke it, but I think the thought is by using the phrase dire emergency, it kind of gives its own limitation, while also being flexible enough to address any type of situation that come up.
Do you know if, to that point, to the dire emergency, has any other community been able to invoke that, and how did they do it? I mean, or can we talk about this for the agenda item for if we put this on the agenda and discuss it more in depth?
Yeah. I do know of one case that they've invoked it that's being challenged right now in Narragansett. They had a building permit moratorium on certain large student housing, and the argument that they made, they didn't follow the notice provision for the other section where you had to call it out in the comp plan, so they tried to argue that it was a dire emergency. That's in front of Judge Taft Carter, and actually Mike Kelly's office was the one that brought suit. And that was going to be heard on a preliminary injunction sometime in August. So I don't know whether or not they've been upheld on that. I'd have to double check to find out.
I agree with Mike. I think that placing a cap on building permits, especially right now, and given our financial situation, which is, I think, universal across Rhode Island, it might be worth it to look into these things.
Do you know, Peter, if economic art, do you know if economic art, I'm sorry, Mike, you.
Yeah, I think if we're gonna have such a in-depth discussion on something that wasn't on the agenda, we really should put over another day. There might be people that have something to say about this, and I don't know, Peter, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I think certainly if you're going to take any action on it, you're going to have to post it on an agenda, and you're allowed to discuss things for discussion purposes only by adding it on, but I think the better course is always to have a written agenda item that gives public notice of it. But, you know, if it's limited to discussion purposes, I don't think you'd catch an home complaint.
Mr. Donegan?
So Peter, for when we have this on an agenda, the kind of things I'd like to explore are, you know, the typical legal analysis that you're so good at, which is, you know, is economic hardship a dire emergency? I would certainly think that if we were to approve all of the applications that are in the pipeline and being discussed at a time when we are going to be so revenue challenged as to even keep the lights on, should Andy's, you know, the darkest prediction come true, we're going to be in a circumstance where we probably can't manage the schools with these additional children. And I wonder if that, we're in a COVID crisis. This isn't where we were 6 months ago. I wonder if that, I guess your thoughts on that would be helpful. And then what we've done is we've looked at the existing, if you could look at, give us your opinion on existing law, but also can we take action either by introducing state legislation that's limited just to East Greenwich. We've had success in the past doing that. We limit it to us so the General Assembly doesn't have to look at the broader implications, either at the General Assembly or by the council adopting an ordinance independently. So if you could just look at those things and give us some advice on that. I think at this point, I'm prepared to go to the General Assembly with that, similar to the way we did with our tax amendment, because I do think this is a dire emergency for us, however the statute contemplates it.
I can get you a memo on that.
Perfect.
Mr. Nara?
Yeah, if I could add two things to Mike's list is, and these may be on your list, Mike. For me, it would be the existing ordinance, a limit that we can impose to limit building permits to 1%. If a moratorium is more of a challenging path, do we have the ability to modify the 1% and to make it 0.5%, 1/4%, and kind of limit it to a certain degree, and what our ability is to do that if in fact we're challenged in other areas, restrict the amount of building that's going on. The second would be is that do any of these actions, in your experience, Pete, have influence regarding a comp permit based project where we're going to see large number of units come online in a fairly tight period of time that are seeking a comp permit? And I'm not sure the legal implications associated with a project seeking that, and then other ordinances or other actions of a town and a council in that respect. So those would be a couple of the things that I'm interested in vetting a little further as well.
Andy, if I could follow on to that, is your question that assuming that we can get a statute passed and all of that, does SHAB have the ability
Yes.
to override it? An initial impression, Peter, it would be that SHAB can only override and approve the decision, maybe not the speed with which permits are issued, but I don't know if that's Andy's question. That's a great one.
Yes.
Yeah, so I think just off the top of my head, and I'll give you a more thorough answer on it at the next meeting that this is on, but I believe that percentage restriction is actually right in the Comp Permit Act. So I don't think that SHAB could override that. Okay. Whether a moratorium could be overridden, I'll give you an answer on that. Off the top of my head, that's a tougher question.
Councilor Corenthal.
Yeah, and then maybe just, I'm just curious as to where our role is versus the planning board. Because, you know, I'm listening to them talking about something last week, and then where do we fit in that? And, you know, I just am not familiar with that. So maybe you can just spell that out a little bit.
I can lay that out.
Mr. Nada, we have coming up a presentation from the planning department. It likely will be a 2-meeting presentation related to affordable housing, comprehensive permits, where we stand in the town as far as applications in the pipeline. Do you think that could serve as a forum to investigate this a bit, or do you want to just keep this separate from those planning board presentations.
Yeah, no, I think it's definitely a pertinent element of that discussion. Probably not the first part. So if there were two parts of part A and B, the first part is just a filing of the annual housing report through the planning board. And in speaking to Lisa, I know that there are several members of the board that would like to be involved in that presentation, just as an update as to what's occurred in this past year, FY20. So the second element to that is a much broader conversation and an update on existing permits and activity and a much broader ramifications regarding local services, where I think these questions would fit very appropriately in that conversation. So as discussed, we're trying to keep them both. I think Lisa feels rightfully so that both two independent issues, but they are related with some of the core information. So we thought that they might dovetail well together, where if we can have Lisa and planning board members present their annual reports accepted by council, we table that item, and then we move on to a much broader conversation, I think, where this information would be very pertinent. And so we can do that at either meeting in September, however the council feels about trying to move that forward.
Yeah, I think that meeting would probably be the second one, might be more appropriate. The first one is the submission of the report. That was, I think, maybe going to be on the September 14th.
Yes.
And we may be able to have that part 2 on the 29th, depending on how broad our agenda is. Our solicitor will have additional information. There'll be members participating with the planning director from the planning board and perhaps from the Affordable Housing Board as well. So that could be quite an interesting discussion.
Yes.
So, Mr. Donegan, if we bring that to that initial meeting with the planning board to start the ball rolling, would that meet your expectations?
It would, thank you.
Okay, yeah, this is going to be a very interesting discussion that is going to be going on for a while. So if there's no further discussion related to our added discussion item, we'll move on to item 10, which is council announcements and comments. So if anybody would like to add an additional item for comment, this is your opportunity. Mr. Zarella.
I would like to just say, I think the schools are doing a commendable job trying to get the students back in. My understanding is that anybody that doesn't want to go to school or have the chance to go to school.
Does the agenda have to be amended?
Yeah, I was going to ask whereas I think we were trying to really button this up in that if you want to make a comment, Mike, you have to add it to the agenda for discussion purposes.
Well, my comment has nothing to do with anything that we're going to pass or anything like that. I'm just
No,
talking about what the school.
it's just any item that you bring up for that is not on the agenda.
I have nothing to say there.
Well,
We can easily amend our agenda, Mike.
No,
I think,
I'm fine.
Dr. Schwager,
Yes.
just to fit it in the box that the AG has made for this issue is that if you could just start with the motion of, I move to add to the agenda, make the comment, and then each subsequent person can have their comment and then just take one vote at the end.
Okay. I mean, during council comment.
Yeah.
Okay. So we don't want to inhibit your comments, Michael, but Mr. Squires has made it as easy as possible.
I don't want to turn it into a big discussion, so I'm all set. Thank you.
Okay. So then we do have an executive session on tap for tonight. So I'd ask our town clerk to read the motion for executive session, and then we'll vote on that.
Sure. There'd be a motion to convene into executive session per Rhode Island General Law 42, 46, 5, 8, 2, and 9 for the approval of executive session minutes from July 13th, 2020, and remain in executive session per Rhode Island General Law 42, 46, 5, 8, 5 for the purpose of discussing the lease with Happy Hearts Learning Center located at 2608 South County Trail, and remain in executive session per Rhode Island General Law 42, 46, 582 pertaining to litigation, specifically East Greenwich et al. Versus Rhode Island DEM et al. KC 2020-0498 and AAD appeal number 20-002/ARE.
we have a motion to go into executive session under the provisions enumerated by the town clerk.
So moved.
Mr. Donegan moves, seconded by Councilor Engelhardt and Councilor Corenthal. We'll take a roll. Councilor Zarella? Councilor Engelhardt?
Aye.
Councilor Corenthal?
Aye.
Councilor Donegan?
Aye.
Chair votes aye. Motion carries 5-0. So we will leave this meeting, and there should be a link for all of you to reconvene in executive session. When executive session is completed, we'll be returning back to this open session link, which was provided earlier this evening. So I'm going to sign off, and I'll see you on the executive session link. Bye-bye.